The Haunted Mansion closed on Tuesday. No big deal. Part of the normal routine, normal circle of life for the Haunted Mansion after its post-holiday run with the Nightmare Overlay. It'll be closed for about 10 days, and in that time, it will transform back into classic, original Haunted Mansion. And it is usually the case that on January 18th, or whatever that reopening date is, a large group of people are going to be excited about going to the Haunted Mansion and getting excited again to see this original version after having been, down for 5 months. Now it's a bigger deal than usual this year because nobody has seen that original classic Haunted Mansion since August of 2023. She closed then with the expectation that she'd be down for the usual 5 months. But 2024 was different because instead of getting the original Haunted Mansion back in January, she stayed closed for an additional 7 months so that Disney could build a new ADA elevator and build a completely new extended queue and update the existing queue. And upgrade in design, theming, use of space. But that's actually a conversation for another video. That's not what we're here to talk about today. Today, what we're here to talk about is what's happening or what could be happening inside the Haunted Mansion. Something is happening inside the attic. There's a new bride coming. But not just a new bride, possibly something else entirely. Who is the new bride? There are clues to her story, clues that we have already seen that give us an idea of what Disney might have in mind. Back in June, during our construction updates, we reported that Disney was quietly building a new animatronic for the bride. Little was known otherwise in terms of what she might look like or what we should expect. We knew only that she was in production. Actually, she was at that point very nearly finished. We just needed to wait until January to find out what her story is. So during the summer, in August, the Haunted Mansion finally reopened. It had been down for quite a while. When it finally opened and you went to the attic scene, obviously the bride was not there. She is not part of the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay story. But things were different nonetheless. When we got to the attic and we made that right turn, the scene that we found to the Doom Buggy's left was not the same as it was in years past. It looked similar, but it was definitely different. The most noticeable change was the arrangement of the giant snake. In 2023, you could find his body it wound along the left side of the tracks, through some gifts, then over the track, winding up on stage right, eating the Christmas list. In 2024, he does not jump the track. He stays on the left side of the track. In fact, his moment ends before we get to the point where the bride would be. The snake changed because he needed the change. The snake changed because the set, the stage on which the bride would sit, is changing. Looking further, as we pass the snake, there is now this new space, a space that is visibly separate from the rest of the attic. And you could see, actually, with your naked eye, better anyway than you could with the video, that there are posts on either side of these gifts. They stood out to me immediately. The suggestion is that it's not just a new bride, but a new set, a new stage for the bride. Something else, in addition to the bride, is going to be happening in that scene. And I make that distinction because if there was no change, if there wasn't something else happening, all you would need to do is take out the projected face, Constance Hatchaway, and put in the new bride in Bob's Your Uncle. That's all you need to do. But they built a whole new system, a whole new set for her to rest on. Therefore, my belief is that something in addition to the new bride is about to happen. There is a rumor, in fact, that was reported by WDW News Today, one that I think is actually spot on. They're reporting a rumor that a window is going to be installed or is installed behind the bride. Now, whether that's a practical window or something like a projection, it's difficult to say right now, but that's the rumors, that they're building a window behind her. And that information helps make more sense out of the posts that we found on the left side of the track today, this year, when the Haunted Mansion reopened. A new set upon which the bride will sit. And actually, interestingly, back in 2023, when you were to go on the Haunted Mansion and meet the bride, as you approach her, you're sort of facing her. You're face to face. You're going at her, and she's talking to you. In this new setup, it's to the left. It's actually almost to you have to kind of look left, and I would assume that they're going to program the dune buggies to point you in that direction, point you to the left. It's not dead on, it's to the left. And why is that? Because they need space or some other means to make that scene do something else, to tell some other kind of story, to build perhaps the projected or practical window, and for some other thing to happen with respect to her relationship with that window. I hope I'm not overselling this. And I say that now because I want this to be true so badly. We're going to get to it, but this is something that is very important to me. But I have to think that there is at least some logic behind this. If they are in fact repositioning the bride, if they are putting her in a different spot, in a new setup and pointing her in a different direction, why would they need to do all that? Does the new window scene possibly factor? Well, yeah, I think it definitely does. Which brings me to why I love this idea so much. Because that was the original fate of the bride from the very beginning. In one of the earliest versions of the Haunted Mansion story, the mansion is owned by Captain Gore. He's a bloodthirsty pirate. And he gets married, and his bride and him take residency in the mansion. His history, though, as a pirate, was a secret. But when his new bride went into the attic and found a chest full of mementos that revealed his identity as the notorious Captain Gore, he killed the bride. He pushed her out the window. After seeing the Hatbox Ghost to your right, and then you make that left turn, your dune buggy pivots and you go backwards. We are literally the bride falling out the window. That's the imagery that we're meant to be taking in at that point. And I think that that's really, really cool. I love the story. I love the way that they build that into your actions on the attraction itself in the dune buggy. And today we take that scene for granted. New guests to the Haunted Mansion have no idea, I would assume, or little idea why it is that the dune buggies turn the way they do and why we're backwards at that point. The story that we get today is completely different. There is no victim. The bride that we see in the attic isn't a victim of Captain Gore. The bride, in fact, is the villain. She's a murderous villain. She's a Black Widow bride, killing off husbands all over the place. You see them in the attic. And that's what gets me excited, is that I love the idea of Disney potentially leaning into their history. We've been seeing this a little bit here and there in different aspects of the park. We've got a Walt Disney animatronic coming to Great Moments with Lincoln Theater at the Main Street Opera House. While we're on the topic, earlier I mentioned how the bride story is, or at least the opportunity for this bride story to change, is an important one for me, an emotional one for me, and it makes me happy, hopefully, if it works out the way it looks like it will, because there's been a movement away from the original story, and we've kind of lost the script a little bit, to borrow a phrase, and everything, it has everything to do with the bride and her relationship with the owner of the home. In my case, the original story, the bride and Captain Gore. It's curious because in today's version, where most people believe, correctly or otherwise, that the owner of the house is Master Gracie, the owner of the mansion, there's no connection between Master Gracie and Constance Hatchaway. There is none. But as we mentioned earlier, there is a connection. In the original story, Captain Gore owned the mansion. Captain Gore married the bride. Captain Gore killed the bride. It's the bride's ghost that haunts Captain Gore so much and to such a degree that he is forced to hang himself in a room with no windows and no doors. Captain Gore is the original ghost host. And so when I hear this, when I see these clues that are suggesting that they might be leaning back to it, it makes me happy. I love to see Disney sort of getting back to their roots a little bit here in this regard, getting back to the original story of the Haunted Mansion, which, by the way, as I mentioned, the Constance Hatchaway thing, a complete departure. They drew that out of thin air, a complete departure from what the original Imagineers came up with for the Haunted Mansion. Only problem is, if you change the bride and her story, then you probably have to change, I don't know, half the attic perhaps. There's a lot of references to the Constance Hatchaway story in the attic. You have to get rid of this and replace them with something else, I suppose. It makes you wonder if they're really ready to go that far. In fact, recently observed clues tell us that perhaps maybe Disney didn't go that far. There's the new Madame Leota's gift shop. All the associated drama aside, one thing you will find of note in the attic is this portrait. That's an artist's rendering of a bride, of course. That's very clear. Is she the bride? Yeah, probably. Actually, most likely. Because there's also the new Haunted Mansion bride sipper that is confirmed to be going on sale when the attraction reopens. Now, while the two don't exactly look alike, one being a very detailed and ominous looking figure, very clearly a bride, the other is a barely recognizable plastic impression of a bride. They don't exactly look alike, but they do still have a few things in common. They both have a creepy blue glow to them, and they are both holding a candelabra. I do think that's the new bride. I think that the image, the portrait that's in Madame Leo's gift shop is the new bride. Now, a couple things to note first. We mentioned the blue glow. Very reminiscent of the Beating Heart Bride. I personally preferred her over Constance Hatchaway, if not because the blue glow is really cool, or because the Beating Heart was also a very cool practical effect that would still hold up today. It's objectively better, by fan standards at least, because so many of us really do love those simple, practical, nostalgic effects. That's why, we have the same Haunted Mansion effects in the Haunted Mansion for years, decades. Nothing has changed, and we're happy for it. People are still enamored with the Pepper Ghost effect. But for some reason, at some point, Disney thought that projecting faces on a sort of blank canvas, a mannequin, if you will, was the cutting edge of technology at the time when they installed that. But I'm so happy. This makes me happy that they are moving away from that. In fact, it could be that that's the reason why they're doing this update to the bride at all, is because they want to distance themselves as much as possible from such a sort of cringy effect. Second thing to note is that while this new bride does resemble or sort of evoke the Beating Heart Bride, she does still appear to be quite villainous looking. She's a very ominous portrait. Now, that's not to say that the Beating Heart Bride was a victim, much like the original bride story was. So, the Beating Heart Bride was still murderous as the story goes. In fact, it is suggested that Constance Hatchaway is an extension, an evolution of that character. Though I choose not to, I choose not to believe that. I guess, or I just feel like they're separate to me. Each iteration, I believe, is separate to me. And that part of the story, though, that complicates the idea that they might be trying to recreate a situation where a bride is being pushed out of a window, thus victimizing her, as opposed to her being a villain. Which takes us back to our original question. Who is she? Who is the new bride? What is her story? At the very least, we can say that Disney is trying to reconnect with some of their history, some of the Haunted Mansion history. They want us to be reminded of the Beating Heart Bride. I also believe that if they are putting in a window, again, be that practical or projected, if they are doing that, it's so that they can tell more of that story, perhaps even finishing that story in a way that we've never seen before. We're going to find out in a week. A quiet story, by the way, up until now. Not a lot of people have been talking about this, but I believe that by January 19th, it's all any of the Disney internet is going to be talking about. And that includes Fresh Baked. We'll be there to cover that story in full with complete coverage of the entire attraction and our thoughts and comparisons that we can make, possibly even a before and after. And on that note, if you're a fan of the Disneyland Resort and you want to be kept up to date about what's happening in the parks on a daily and weekly basis, do be sure to subscribe to our main channel. There's a link in the description. And may I recommend that video? That's a link to our 8 expert hacks video. It helps you get around the Disneyland Resort from somebody who's been to the Disneyland Resort, I don't know, a couple thousand times at least. Required viewing for anyone who is looking to master Disneyland. We'll see you next time, guys. Fresh Baked.